Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Homo sapiens and civilization. So Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is supposedly the oldest trace of civilization we have, estimated from 10,000 BC. And before that, we were supposedly hunter-gatherers. And then there was what historians call the Neolithic Revolution, invention of agriculture. Homo sapiens have existed for around 160,000 years. So what are the chances that during these 160,000 years at some point, civilization emerged and collapsed, considering it only took 12,000 years to go from hunter-gathering to us? Hit me with your knowledge /x/.
I've made this exact point before. It does seem hard to believe, especially since the main development that's attributed to forming civilizations, cities, etc., is just the development of agriculture. So how am I supposed to believe that the same kind of human, at the same level of mental evolution, who supposedly went from simple agriculture to launching rockets into space in just 12,000 years, somehow spent over 150,000 years before that never realizing they could stick a seed in the ground and a plant would grow? It absolutely doesn't add up. And it's curious how almost every ancient megalithic civilization we know of has stories about how they didn't build their cities. They were already there, built by an older civilization when they arrived, but still mainstream historians just dismiss it as stories. I think human civilization is vastly older than someone wants us to know about.
Would you happen to have resources I could take notes from on that, like the said stories and their origin? I'd like to compile anything interesting on the subject.
Sources. Sorry, I had to do it. Pretty much every civilization has a story regarding a deluge that took place 12,000 years ago, from the Greeks, Israelites, Indians, Chinese to Indonesia. Almost all of the accounts said that greater, more advanced human civilization was a thing beforehand, and that the vast majority of it was washed away, making it so that humanity had to basically start over. You had the account of Plato regarding Atlantis, basically saying that it sunk to the bottom of the sea, making the Atlantic unnavigable to get to the other side. Plato does actually say that it was possible to get to the other side of the Atlantic, however says that with Atlantis sunk it is no longer so. The Hebrew legend comes from an earlier Sumerian legend in which Enlil decides to exterminate humanity for disturbing his sleep by flooding the earth. The Indian, Chinese, and other versions of the story are much the same. The point being, human civilization existed at a higher level before the flood 12,000 years ago. The earth was flooded by anachronistic or evil forces, or by Deus, and humanity had to start over with most people, technology, and knowledge dead and gone.
Bronze Age technology and metals besides carved and moved rocks are completely erased from the record in less than 12,000 years. This planet undergoes routine cataclysm cycles in time scales about that long. Everything you think and are taught about how this planet's geographic features were formed in human history and genetics is provably wrong. The evidence slowly breaks the paradigms of the current time despite direct efforts to combat the insinuations and conclusions that can be gathered from this information. That mankind had advanced languages and at a minimum Bronze Age or Iron Age or greater level technology in advanced stone building techniques and astronomical knowledge and was sailing the world oceans up to and beyond 100,000 years ago. Native Americans were not the first peoples to settle the Americas.
Atlantis has no translation from Plato, though language evolves. Atlantis, Orion. The language is there, the tonal shift is just off a degree. Orion's children were the original seeders. Their world sank. The 7 sages seeded the world's knowledge and created the 4 tribes. Each culture tells the same stories. Some have parts the other didn't, but all the same. Human civilization has endured and endured, while the other inhabitants have come and gone. Different civilizations built them, but cultures all around the world have similar stories of the floods, snakes that swallowed the world, comet or some other disaster, and wise men that wandered the world and taught them agriculture, architecture, and law. So that means there is some common connection between them. It's just nobody knows what or who that is. And it's not like all above is impossible. We should not dismiss those stories entirely, just like we did with Troy, and many other stories that came up to be true in the end. And it's definitely not impossible. If aliens are suddenly a real thing, then this is even less preposterous.
Who built the ancient megaliths that appear around the world? There must be an ancient and extremely powerful civilization that spread all around the world.
It's pretty clear that during the late Ice Age, during the early Copper Age, a group of humans developed some form of civilization that spanned the globe and seeded civilizations in river valleys throughout Eurasia and America, which eventually fell apart as the advanced human colonists interbred with the natives.
An extraterrestrial civilization once came to Earth and mined the shit out of South America. Once they were done, they left, and the region was left as an arid wasteland. It was so long ago that humans who had contact with them could only keep the knowledge on how to cut the stones like your pick.
The stonework in pick was likely done with the red-leafed codal, snake, plant in South America. The juice from this plant supposedly had an enzyme that softened stone to the extent that it became moldable, like clay. Very likely this is also Solomon's stone-cutting serpent, the shamir. See links to stories of the green chisel. Also likely is that all traces of it have been deliberately removed from the public records bar one explorer's diary from 100+ years ago, because the elites still have it. My theory is that all the modern tunneling machines currently chewing away underneath most developed cities right this second, spit this out to produce the ridiculous distances they apparently achieve daily. Spraying the rock with enzymes as the teeth buzz away at the face. This is why Elon's Hyperloop project wasn't as roundly ridiculed as you would have expected. He knew about this new combo tech before it got fully adopted everywhere by the elites. The scale of the Hyperloop is not feasible on any level without a system like this ready to go, and b, a narrative that drives most people voluntarily underground. Enzyme-assisted tunneling machines plus CMA scares, or aliens, or you're going to Mars, citizen, just hop in this windowless spaceship, equals most fanatic types will go down into the deep underground military bases without a second thought and never see the sun again. Those with privileges will be able to Hyperloop travel to other deep underground military bases, giving the illusion they haven't opted to live in a gigantic tomb because the TV newsreader man said some stuff, but that there's a thriving underground civilization that, if you're good and do what you're told, repeat what you're told, you may get to go and experience.
In the heart of King Solomon's throne room, an expectant crowd assembled, their eyes fixed on a velvet cloth, draped pedestal. With bated breath, they waited as Solomon, his hand steadied by the power of his enchanted ring, almost hesitated before slowly unveiling the elusive shamir worm. As the cloth lifted, the creature's iridescent glow illuminated the chamber, casting mesmerizing patterns on the awestruck faces. The near mythical shamir, a miraculous entity capable of slicing the toughest stones, now lay before them, inspiring wonder and reverence. In the Gemara, the shamir is a worm or a substance that had the power to cut through or disintegrate stone, iron, and diamond. King Solomon is said to have used it in the building of the first temple in Jerusalem, in the place of cutting tools. For the building of the temple, which promoted peace, it was inappropriate to use tools that could also cause war and bloodshed.
If humans were primarily nomadic before agriculture, they would have had a different form of culture than sedentary humans, but there would have been a much wider, faster spread of ideas and technologies and concepts than later when people were tied to a particular place by agriculture. There would have been regional meeting places with a more decentralized but larger area of influence. I think we also vastly underestimate what they could do with wood, stone, and animal products because those things would not be preserved in the archaeological record. Large wooden structures and ships are not impossible. We have evidence of a massive loss of culture and technology documented in the Bronze Age, but we would have far less evidence of the late Wood Age collapse.
I agree completely. While it may not mesh well with your theory, I believe that humans were far more sedentary in the pre-Younger Dryas than is commonly believed. Coastal areas are far richer in food resources than inland areas, and there are many examples of hunter-gatherers with no agriculture whatsoever subsisting off the sea while being completely sedentary. I believe that the coastline could have supported populations of several hundred or so in wooden towns.
It was just wizards. If you know you can make rocks melt or become moldable like clay, then go back to normal.
There was a study on the Sacsayhuaman walls back in 2013 by a Russian team of geologists, PhD, and some of the conclusions they came to from the data just made it more wild. For example, the rocks that make up the walls are the same composition as the rocks in the quarry and surrounding area, however they have different crystalline structures under a microscope. The rocks in the walls have been processed somehow, giving them microcrystalline structure with almost no fossils or intrusions, which is completely different from the rocks in the supposed quarry. Additionally, some of the seemingly processed rocks in the wall also have calcic recrystallized veins, suggestive of forming by incredible heat in a non-homogeneous mixture, perhaps formed from the native limestone contact with lava flows. However, that doesn't explain rocks in the wall that don't have these veins or any intrusions whatsoever, which many don't. So the rocks that make up the wall seem processed or different from the native rocks in structure, but also seem natural, like a limestone with some calcic veins that came into contact with a lava flow and may have been cut and moved conventionally. Unlikely when you consider the locals didn't invent the wheel or have trees. Even accepting the rock as completely natural, the elephant in the room is still how they cut, moved, and placed them. One interesting hypothesis put forward was normal native limestone and volcanic rocks crushed into powder, heated or mixed with an additive of some kind or several kinds, ending up as quicklime or lime powder, which then became either hydraulic lime or microlite lime that was formed or poured into position and due to an additive set with just water or air and is more erosion resistant. Look up Roman concrete for an example of additives making the difference between concrete lasting 120 years, our modern concrete, versus 2,000 plus years and still functional. Roman volcanic tephra and pumice concrete recipe. Or wizards.
Isn't science supposed to be about new discoveries and finding the truth? Why do they fear the past and belittle new discoveries about our true past?
Because there's very little money in it, even less public interest. It's basically irrefutable by the hard archaeological evidence that Sumer was not the first civilization, however that's defined. The Sumerians' own writing makes it pretty cut and dry that they were not the first, to say nothing of the Tepe sites. Blows my mind some people brush it off as a religious site for hunter-gatherers when Göbekli hasn't even been remotely fully excavated. But think about how many people care about the hard history of even the last 300 years. Not a lot. Now how about the medieval? Sure, lots of people like the imagery of knights and castles, but very few care about it beyond that surface narrative and aesthetic. Same for Rome, despite its lionization by virtually all European civilizations to come after it. People like the narrative, but couldn't give a damn about the history. Plus, the further back you go, the harder and harder it is to find evidence of something, no matter how plausible it seems. Ice Age civilizations? Well, those guys have been underwater for 10,000 years, and water is very good at destroying evidence. Did the civilization in question use cheap, regrowing, and easier-to-work wood over stone for most of their buildings? That'll leave next to no trace. Until we found the bloodbath of a battle at Talence Valley, we assumed all of Bronze Age Northern and Central Europe was a sparsely populated tribal backwater for this exact reason. Erosion, inclement weather, and even possibly willful destruction have likely erased entire civilizations. So you have to invest increasingly more money to get increasingly vague evidence for something very few members of the public actually care about.
Nothing to see here. Humanity has existed at its current cognitive capacity for at least 150,000 years. Sumer was discovered in the 17th century. New paradigm of history was born for 144,000 years. We were nothing till we figured out agriculture and settled in cities and nations. Paradigm is generally accepted and taught all over the world for the next couple hundred years. Flash forward to 1990s. Göbekli Tepe is found, 12,000 years old, 5,000 years before Sumer, 2,000 years before the invention of agriculture, 15 times the size of Stonehenge. Before the Bronze Age, only 5% has been excavated. So, we're missing huge swaths of history, aren't we? Why don't we admit that we don't know, rather than make up stories that don't make sense?
You're correct. Most of history is whatever the ones that control the reins of power says it is. The reason as to why they always cover older civilizations up, especially ones that go against their narrative, is because a repeated cycle of destruction happens every so often. The biggest one that caused massive catastrophes happens every 792 years or so, accompanied by the return of a big-ass planet that comes back to orbit our sun from its sister star, the dead star Nemesis. The other catastrophes are accompanied by an event that has a so-and-so chance of happening every 138 years, but leaves near equal deviations. The powers that shouldn't be know this and always prepare accordingly. Some guy pointed out the exact chronology of all this down to the T, and I find this phenomenon very interesting.
Not really. I guess I should qualify my post by saying most of my knowledge on this subject comes from probably biased YouTube videos. But as far as I know, these points aren't disputed by mainstream historians, they just call them stories. But you should be able to find information on it fairly easily. For instance, there's the dream stele in front of the Sphinx, which claimed it was already there when the Egyptians arrived. I think also the Inca people and Machu Picchu. I'm trying to recall now the ones I've heard about, but I've seen videos of local people who make those claims about their ancestors. That they didn't build the stuff historians said they did. Actually, I'm trying to refresh my memory, and researching this now, I just found that the Aztecs didn't build their pyramids, and that's actually confirmed. Apparently, it was abandoned for 600 years before they found it. Another confirmed one is the Olmecs, which very little is known about. Although, of course, historians say they must have been the first, even though they don't really know that either. They just assume they must have been. I guess it's kind of like if a new civilization occupies the remains of an older one, they tend to erase almost everything about the older one, or it just gets attributed to them. For all we know, there could be 3 or 4 civilizations all built on top of the ruins of each other, and we would just think it's one group.
Red pill me on the true age of human civilization and the metaphysical implications. How old do you think human civilization truly is? Between sites like Göbekli Tepe that are thousands of years older than what the current narrative allows for, to the fact that ancient Egyptian and Sumerians did not see themselves as the first civilization, but just the next in a long line of civilization, it seems plausible that human civilization is much older than we think. Since human society tends to be coastal, it's entirely possible that during or before the Ice Age there were coastal cities that were lost when the water levels rose. Atlantis. There could also have been cases where newer civilizations built on the sites of older ones and even used the building materials of previous civilizations in theirs, destroying or hiding evidence of previous civilization. Already in mainstream archaeology, this is a known problem with dating artifacts. Given the fact that humans became genetically modern approximately 300,000 years ago and human civilization is theorized to be 10,000 years old, it seems plausible that we had civilization sooner than what we currently know, right? If so, what knowledge was lost? Does anyone still have hidden knowledge of previous civilizations? What could it be, and why do they hide it from us?
It's more ancient than you can imagine. There are 4 cycles on this world, each of which end in global cataclysm that resets the world back to the Stone Age. Long time ago, an enlightened race of gods, older and more powerful than Sumerian Egyptian pantheon, came into this world and taught humanity how to track the dates of reset in order to not get reset, but we lost that over time. Then they disappeared together with the humans of old, who were much grander than what we are now. Perhaps there was a war, perhaps it was something else, but regardless, with them gone, we screwed up one time and got reset into Stone Age and even started to degenerate. Then came Sumerians, Egyptian gods, and reversed the process, but only so that we were just smart enough to gather their form of cocaine, that is, gold and silver. We didn't evolve, we degenerated, and then the process was reversed to a small degree in order to take advantage of us.
What do you believe is most likely to end human civilization?
A slow, quiet whimper as everything just crumbles. The fire is burning now, but the house still stands. There may come a time when the fire has eaten everything and it all just falls. And that fall may be quiet. It may even be better than the old ways. Imagine, for a moment, a young man of an ethnicity that you can't quite place, living in a small rural village in America. After civilization falls, there isn't a power vacuum. Society still holds together, and manufacturing is still profitable. So your community becomes tighter and tighter knit. Instead of getting energy from the city, you get it from solar panels or a steam engine in town that a clever engineer put together. And, eventually, you decide to just use electricity less. You have some electronics, maybe your phone stays charged, until it breaks, and you have a fan running. But, as electricity gets more cumbersome to keep running, you choose to turn the lights off for good. After the mayor dies, his son realizes you need to stay together to stay safe, and he goes into power. nobody sees this as a bad thing. And quickly you have, well, feudalism. This is how human beings naturally organize themselves. Guns have become so good, so plentiful, and so profitable to manufacture now that it's unlikely that they'll ever stop being made. Heck, a clever engineer could figure out every step for mass-producing a semi-automatic rifle given a few months, as long as he's making hundreds and not millions. And these guns will make it impossible for an invading force to take over a decently armed population. Trust me, America tried hard in Afghanistan and Vietnam. If the federal, and, slowly, the state, government collapsed, then America would become Afghanistan. The graveyard of nations. And that might mean that feudalism will come back stronger than ever, because there is nothing to oppose it, and it's so naturally stable. The long-term trajectory is that humanity will survive. By hook or by crook. And we will expand into space slowly as our need arises. It might take hundreds or even 1,000 years before it really becomes necessary, but heat will be our biggest problem. Every human is a 100-watt space heater. Have enough of them on just one planet and we'll cook ourselves. I think we're due for a population explosion as all of the people who don't want kids begin to die out in the West. Over the next couple hundred years, we might actually run into a technological dark age as the decreasing trust in society and growing individualism, coupled with decreasing IQ and a desire for more children due to all of the people who don't want kids self-selecting themselves out of the gene pool, drives us further to more and more widely distributed and less connected society, eventually possibly resulting in feudalism. This might be wrong, because we might end up self-correcting, but it's one possibility for a civilizational collapse. The only possibility for a proper extinction event would probably be with AI. But, if that doesn't happen by 2040 at the latest, then that means that it's not going to happen. To be honest, the impact of AI on civilization is completely unpredictable, so I prefer to leave it out of my consideration about this stuff. It's like discussing faster than light travel in your ideas about the far future and plans to colonize the galaxy. It messes with so much shit and makes it so hard to predict the future that it's better to just not even try, beyond a few vague assumptions about what these technologies may bring. Honestly, though, this future of feudalism really wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. Technology would still develop and infrastructure would be good, because technology is so advanced and unanimously seen as beneficial by everyone. Guns would still exist. And so would spacecraft. It might be that people want to become independent and have kids so badly that there is still a market and drive for space travel. Just because of rising temperatures due to the heat of humanity. For me, this is just how the calculations work out if you think about the exponential growth of the human population. Carbon emissions aren't a cause of climate change, they're a symptom. The cause is that there are simply more humans on Earth. And more humans means more waste heat. Reduce carbon emissions all you want, nuclear reactors, coal plants. Whatever. Eventually it all becomes heat. I mean, you look into some of this climate change stuff. Water vapor is a greenhouse gas? Water vapor is an unavoidable product of producing energy. As long as there are oceans and we're putting heat into the atmosphere, you're gonna have water vapor LMAO. You can't produce energy without it eventually turning into waste heat. That's just thermodynamics for you. Maybe greenhouse gases accelerate this process, but they aren't the reason why we have a problem. Thermodynamics is the real culprit. And that means that as long as there are more humans, it's gonna get hotter. If AI doesn't kill or radically change the trajectory of humanity, then over the next few hundred years, we will expand into space just in an effort to radiate more of our heat. Just like any other life form, we reproduce until we run out of food or space. And there's a lot of energy. So our limit is waste heat, which is our version of a limit on space, I guess. Sorry, I'll stop crowding the thread. I just want to get some minds churning here.
We are a civilization of ants. If something happens, like say the sun belches plasma and it hits Earth, everything is done, gone. It hits Earth and 50% of life is gone in an instant. The ensuing calamity takes another 40% over the next few months as everything crumbles. Over the next few years, life expectancy drops, and people don't have time to record or preserve anything that doesn't directly help them survive. Anything that breaks is left to rot or scavenged for parts as the know-how to fix complex equipment is lost. When you stop and think, it's pretty easy to see how this works.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.